Newcomers action plan. We ran on a very detailed proposal. In fact, if you guys get me the platform, I'd appreciate it. A very detailed proposal to push the professional licensing bodies to provide a fast and fair process for new Albertans to have their credentials, education, and experience recognized so that they can go to work at their skill level, contributing fully to our economy, and that for me is very important. I believe, and I speak as the longest ever serving federal immigration minister in modern Canadian history, and a 9-year minister for multiculturalism, I believe that the number one priority for new Canadians is jobs, the economy, employment, opportunity, and the barriers to opportunity created in Canada for recognition of professional credentials and education. I think this is frankly immoral. We end up welcoming some highly educated people from all around the world who come here with high hopes as economic immigrants, only too often to face unemployment or underemployment, often stuck in survival jobs because they cannot get the professional credentials or licenses recognized by licensing authorities or by Canadian employers. And that is why we have launched the action plan for fairness for newcomers under the leadership of Minister of Labour and Immigration Jason Kenney, with the assistance of Parliamentary Secretary Mohammed Yassin. And amongst other things, we will be having a Premier's Summit on fairness for newcomers, where we will invite immigrants facing barriers, employers, professional licensing bodies, and others to have a very frank discussion about knocking down barriers that exist to the economic inclusion of immigrants to Canada. The legislation that we passed, the Fair Registration Practices Act, provides a legal framework, and it tells the professional licensing bodies that they must provide applicants with a fast and fair process for licensure. And these are just some of the steps that we'll be taking in the action plan. We'll also be creating an office for fairness for newcomers that will basically monitor the professional licensing bodies. Could you find this appropriate section here, please? We'll be providing an office that'll have a mandate to not supervise, but oversee the activities of the professional and trade licensing bodies to make sure that they're complying with the legislation. We'll also be providing funding for small loans to help newcomers pay for their licensing exams and additional courses they may need to take in order to get their licenses recognized. We'll be creating an Alberta Government Mentorship for Newcomers program to match immigrant professionals with mentors in the public service who can help guide them through the process of credential recognition. We'll be expanding the work of the International Qualifications Assessment Service within the government. We'll be continuing support for settlement agencies that help newcomers find employment at their skill level. I'm pleased to report to you that we promised here to put foreign credential recognition on the agenda of the first minister's meeting to push for faster action on fairness, and I did that. I got this on the agenda and I led the discussion at the Council of the Federation in Saskatoon, and we managed to secure the support of all 13 provincial and territorial premiers for more action, coordinated action on this important issue. So these are some of the initial steps that we have taken. Minister Copping and Parliamentary Secretary Yassin have also launched public consultations on the Alberta Advantage Immigration Strategy, a key part of our job creation strategy. This is to streamline and modernize the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program to make sure that it's working for Alberta, that it's fast and fair, within which there will be at least 4 new streams of immigration to Alberta. One will be a entrepreneur immigration program. We have a population challenge in rural Alberta. People are leaving. The population of many rural communities is shrinking, and there are many businesses that cannot find buyers. But there are many prospective immigrants who would be happy to invest in an Alberta business. We will try to connect them, particularly outside the two big cities, through this rural entrepreneur immigration stream. We'll also be creating a rural renewal immigration program that will prioritize Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program applications for people committed to living and working in smaller communities. Again, we have enough people in Edmonton and Calgary at 1.2 million in each city, but we have a population challenge in the smaller communities. We will create the International Student Entrepreneur Program that will encourage foreign student graduates of Alberta post-secondary institutions to start a business and stay in Alberta permanently. And finally, we will create a foreign graduate startup visa program that will target brilliant foreign grads of top universities to do startup businesses here in Alberta. I think this will appeal to a lot of the brilliant foreign student grads in the United States who cannot get their visas after they graduate. If they want to start a business, I want to invite them to come to Alberta. But our revised Alberta Advantage immigration strategy will not be limited to those 4 streams. There will be other streams that we encourage people to offer their thoughts to the consultation being led by Minister Coppin. So those are some of the things we've already done. A whole lot more. I think we've already delivered on, if I'm not mistaken, 72 or 73 of the 375 platform commitments. So we are well underway as a government. It's going to take time for us to get this economy back on track, but we've seen some positive signs over the summer of renewed investor confidence and economic growth in Alberta, and we are very focused on continuing the momentum. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
If this is your first time meeting the Premier, please let us know your name and your outlet. I think we'll start with one question and one follow-up, and then go around.
I know it was part of the platform Pipes, Economy and Jobs. In Alberta governments, the previous 2 governments, I remember they talked about diversifying the economy. Just wanted to know if anything has been done or any plans in there to diversify Alberta's economy?
Yes, it is important that we continue diversifying. I believe the best way to do so is to create the best possible overall economic condition to attract investment in any and all kinds of industries. I think that's better than politicians picking individual businesses or particular industries for subsidies, to be honest with you. I really think that kind of central control approach does not work. We tried that in Alberta in the late 1980s. The government risked and lost about $10 billion in subsidies and loan guarantees for businesses to diversify. We bought a cell phone company, and a tire recycling plant, and a meatpacking plant, and a magnesium plant, and they all went bankrupt. So I think we learned our lesson, that we should let business be business instead of politicians pretending to play business with people's tax dollars. So that's why I think the best, the most effective strategy to diversify our economy, to reduce our dependence on traditional oil and gas, is to create the best overall economic conditions that attract investment. And that's why we are bringing in the lowest business tax rates in Canada, amongst the lowest in North America, with the 1/3 reduction in the general business tax rate. Which we are taking the Alberta business tax rate from 12 down to 8%. This will give us a more attractive tax rate than in all 10 provinces and 44 of the 50 United States. And so I can tell you, I've already, and that's also why we're cutting red tape by 1/3 with our very ambitious red tape reduction strategy, because that's a big barrier to job creating investment that can diversify our economy. I'm taking this message to industry leaders across the country and around the world. I, within the first month as Premier, met with the CEOs of all five major Canadian chartered banks and a number of the other major financial institutions operating in the country to encourage them to move operations to this province to benefit from these policies. I've met with three of the four CEOs of the major telecom companies in Canada. I've met with the CEOs of some of the world's largest private equity firms. And I've been meeting with airline companies, with agri-food businesses, with information technology companies. And I can tell you there's a significant interest in new investments. So it's not going to come from government picking this company or that industry. It will be creating the best possible overall conditions. And I can tell you that there will be announcements made this fall. Billions of dollars of new capital investment in Alberta, outside of oil and gas, which will prove the strategy is right.
Perfect. Just this morning, it was in CBC News, I guess. It's all over the place that some of the American states are attracting businesses doing business in Calgary.
Exactly.
Because of the lack of ease of business and taxes.
That's exactly why we have to do this. The United States, if you're in a competition, you can't just stand still if others are going faster. And the United States has reduced their business tax rates. They're offering all sorts of incentives. In the case of that story, free land, lower property taxes, lower business taxes, less red tape, faster approvals. And we need to get in the game. And that's what we're trying to do as a government. And I encourage our municipalities to do this as well. We all have to be rowing in the same direction. And having the city of Calgary, for example, effectively raising tax rates on businesses outside the downtown core is very unhelpful. So I encourage our municipal partners to do the same thing we're doing, make us more competitive.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're the chair. I should. Go ahead.
We're not really going in a circle, but.
So anyone, because other also people welcome. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I have a question kind of related to the job issue. The expedited processing of the credential is very impressive. But as far as I know, because I'm very familiar with the physician process, how to become a physician if you graduate from other countries, the credential is actually not a problem at all for those foreign trained physicians. The bottleneck is the job opening. It's very, very limited. Probably one department, only one position opening for those IMG, like international medical graduates. But of course, for Canadian graduates, it's maybe 10 times or even 20 times higher. So the bottleneck is actually the job opening for those. How can you?
Good point. Yeah. And scared, in other words, limited access to residency positions.
Right.
Yes.
Very limited.
So I think the reason for this is that governments have tried to control health expenditures by limiting access to residency positions, because the health department's view is that every new physician with a billing number is a cost driver. And 10% of the Alberta government's budget is spent on compensation for doctors. We spend, I think it's about $5 billion a year on compensation for doctors. And so there is a need for us to control those costs. Now, I haven't had a chance to look into this more closely yet. I do believe that it is easier for aspiring physicians to get residencies and to practice outside the big cities if they're willing to go and serve rural communities. Often rural communities are recruiting doctors from overseas who come from medical systems with standards that are very close to Canada's. And they have arrangements through the College of Physicians to offer them conditional licenses to practice upon arrival without having to do a residency. So I would encourage, maybe one thing we can do is to come up with matching those rural, underserved, rural clinics and hospitals with foreign medical grads who are willing to move to smaller communities to serve them. That might be one way we can bridge the gap. So, but this is one of the issues we will certainly be looking at. You're right to identify, and it's complicated because there are many Canadian kids, Canadian youth, who go abroad to study medicine because they can't get into the scarce positions in our own medical schools. Then there are Canadian graduates of Canadian medical schools looking for residency positions. There's the Canadian graduates of foreign medical schools coming home to look for residency positions. There are the foreign graduates of Canadian medical schools looking for residency positions. And then there are the foreign graduates of foreign medical schools looking for residency positions, right?
Yeah,
There's all these different streams.
yeah.
And to be honest with you, to be blunt, I don't think we can accommodate everybody. But we have to be fair. Appreciate you.
About the Blue Ribbon panel, Janice McKinnon is not only known for balancing the budget in Saskatchewan, she is also known for closing down many rural hospitals. So will the same thing be repeated here?
No, Dr. McKinnon has been clear that the situation we're facing in Alberta is not as grave as the one that her NDP government inherited in Saskatchewan 25 years ago. But she has said if we don't deal with the fiscal problem, with the deficit here, that it will deteriorate to that point where deep cuts are necessary. Now, I've always said, back in 1993, when she was having to close hospitals in Saskatchewan, the Klein government here was reducing spending by 18%. We don't need to reduce spending by anything like that if we act now. And that we will have to, I believe that we will have to reduce spending somewhat. And I look forward to Dr. McKinnon's Blue Ribbon report for advice on how to do so. Let me just say that Alberta has the largest deficit of any Canadian government on a per capita basis. The NDP quadrupled the size of our debt, taking it from 13 to 56 billion, headed to $100 billion. We've gone through 6 credit downgrades, making it more expensive for us to borrow money. We're now spending $2 billion a year in interest payments. Every dollar spent on interest payments is a dollar that we do not spend on schools or hospitals. So that's why we were elected on a commitment to balance the budget thoughtfully over 4 years. If we do this intelligently, there will be some difficult, and I guarantee you there will be some controversial decisions, and we will be attacked for that. But I am prepared to be attacked in order to bring balance back to our finances so we don't end up with $100 billion in debt and billions of dollars going to the bankers in interest payments. So Dr. McKinnon's panel will give us advice. It doesn't have to be like 1993 if we act prudently now. I'll just close with one point. Our platform was based on quite conservative revenue projections, but the NDP's projections were unrealistically high for revenue. It's turned out that the economy is much weaker than the NDP projected, and that is, we'll have to correct for that in our budget. That's why there will have to be some modest spending reductions. But Alberta has the most expensive government and provincial government in Canada. We spend more per person than any other provincial government, so I think we can find savings that do not affect frontline services. That's our challenge.
So, okay.
Ready to give it to Teresa? Yeah. All right.
Yeah, my question is about the program, and I'm glad that we are putting this in the rural areas. Now, the question is, if you will be prioritizing workers in the rural area, do you have any plans of strengthening the immigrant serving agencies in the area? Do they
Yes.
have immigrant
Yes.
serving agencies?
Absolutely. And my model for this is Manitoba. They've done a very good job of attracting and retaining newcomers in smaller communities, partly with very strong settlement support for them. And credit also goes to certain towns and small cities in Manitoba that haven't just left that to the federal or provincial governments. They've also gathered ground. I'll give you one example. there's a town called Morden, Morden in Manitoba, which 10 years ago had a population of 5,000. Now it has a population of nearly 10,000. They've doubled in a decade through immigration, not their natural birth rate. And they've worked with employers, the town council, the nonprofits to provide very strong settlement support, language training, job placement, soft social support, and I want to replicate the successful Manitoba model of rural immigration and settlement support. Let me add to you, because you're coming from the Filipino community perspective, that one of the great contributions of the Pinoy community to the Canadian prairies has been their willingness to go live and stay in rural communities. Frankly, more so than other communities. So you can, many of these smaller communities around Alberta, you'll see a couple of Chinese-owned businesses that sometimes go back 100 years, and maybe some, often a hotel or convenience stores owned by folks of South Asian origin. But it's the Pinoys who are going in large numbers in staying in communities and revitalizing them. And I can tell when a rural community has a future is when there's a Filipino grocery store in it. and you can go to the Catholic or the evangelical church, and often a third or a half of the congregation will be people of Albertans of Filipino origin, and you can see the schools that are stable or growing in population because of the Pinoy families. So I think the willingness of Filipino immigrants to stay in the smaller communities is a great blessing, and I would like to see the same thing happen for folks coming from other backgrounds as well. I think maybe one of the reasons that Filipinos are more willing to stay is they often come with, not always, but often come with a stronger English language background, and so they integrate more easily.
Right.
And some people coming from other backgrounds want to be more proximate to a large urban community of their language of origin, if you know what I'm saying. But I think there's other reasons, and in Manitoba, they've been successful at getting folks of all backgrounds to go out and stay in rural communities in large and growing numbers. That's a good news story. That's our story. That's how we settled the West.
Yes.
It was exactly, that was how my predecessor as immigration minister, Clifford Sifton, 110 years ago, said free land, and we want newcomers and their hard work ethics to go into the rural communities and settle them. And I want to bring that spirit back.
Thank you. And I do hope that you will open the families soon.
Well, I'm not sure the federal government has, I think there are constraints on what provinces can do in their nominee programs, but we'll certainly look at that.
Should Albertans be ready to face the drastic cuts in services like health, education, and degree?
Well, we will keep our platform commitment to maintain or increase funding for healthcare and education. Now, having said that, it won't be easy because there are cost pressures of the aging population, health inflation, enrollment growth in the schools. So we will have to find efficiencies in health and education that we can then reallocate to serve the growing population. So I'm not saying that those two departments are 2/3 of our budget. And so they will have to come forward with savings. We will, but I think this is possible. Alberta spends 20% more than any other province per person on healthcare, even though we have the youngest population. This makes no sense. And so surely we can find ways to, like other provinces. And by the way, we have longer surgical wait times. We're spending more with a younger population to get less. I don't find that acceptable. And there will be lots of special interest groups who say, you can't make any changes. Well, I'm not prepared to accept long and growing wait times for more and more money with the youngest population in the country and the most expensive healthcare system. So that's why we have contracted, I think it's Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young to do a performance review of Alberta Health Services to identify administrative waste, and that's just a beginning. So you had the list there. Thank you for correcting.
Yeah.
Mr.
We talked to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So last week or 2 weeks ago, so he said this is the first time in the last 10 years the medical review for Alberta healthcare, and we are hoping that we can reduce the wait time. This is the main concern for the Alberta.
That we won't be able to do that overnight.
Yeah.
But Saskatchewan brought in something called the Strategic Surgical Initiative, which contracted more surgeries to private surgical clinics within the public insurance system, and they managed to reduce the cost of each surgery by on average 25%. That means they can do more surgeries for the same amount of money, meaning they were able to reduce by 30% the wait list. So we hope to repeat the success of the Saskatchewan surgical initiative. Did you have a follow-up question?
No.
You had a question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And which outlet are you from?
I'm with Calgary Arabia. My name is Nora.
Oh, sure.
Calgary Arabia is on Residency, the Irish radio show. Let's talk about art.
Please.
Can you please tell us what happened in the past 100 days and what you have planned for the arts?
Well, what we have planned is to have a robust art sector, and in fact, page 81 of our platform details the arts and culture policy. The first 100 days were focused on big economic issues like carbon tax, Open for Business Act, cutting red tape. But Minister Ahir, Minister for Culture and Multiculturalism, is working on the converting the Alberta's screen-based production grant into a tax credit, which is more flexible, allows us to attract larger productions to Alberta. We are going to be introducing the Arts Professions Act to give formal recognition to artists, their representative associations, their freedom of expression, and their economic, including their contractual rights. We will be supporting the recommendation of the Canadian Artists Organization to have a 5% royalty paid to artists who are alive for the resale of their work. Because for visual artists, some often they sell work for years and years at a very low price until they get a name established, and then their pieces get resold for hugely higher prices, and the artist sees none of that. So we're talking about trying to work with the federal government on a 5% royalty that would go back to artists on the resale of their work, so they see some small value of the appreciation of their work over time. We'll be providing a portion of the Alberta Lottery Fund revenue to support a Creative Partnerships Alberta program, emulating one in Australia, to bring in more private sector philanthropic money to support the arts. We will establish a goal of growing Alberta's cultural industries by 25% or $1.5 billion over the next decade. So those are some of the initial steps being taken. I am personally a huge supporter of the arts. Just last night I was at a chamber music festival in Rosebud, Alberta, and the day before that enjoyed a wonderful piece of theater by the Alberta Theatre Company. And so whether it is the traditional arts or the artistic expression in our multicultural communities, we want to be there to support. But all of this is dependent on a growing economy. Because the revenues we have to support the arts will be dependent on whether or not we have a growing economy. If the economy continues to stagnate, then there will not be additional funds available for the arts, to be honest. Good, thank you for asking it. I don't often get asked that question.
It's great to see you again. Thank you so much for your help with my Vietnamese community particularly. And if you don't know, that Mr. Jason Kenney is a very close friend of the Vietnamese community in Alberta, and he is a hero to all of us.
Thank you.
By recognizing our flag, as the British flag. You remember that day, 2 years ago? We was getting in touch.
And helping to bring the refugees.
yes, and helping the refugees and the freedom atlas and stuff. So in our community, wherever he goes, he's our hero. You know what I mean? Thank you so much again. And congratulations on your election victory and 100-day achievement and milestone here. This really established our trust and that we voted for the right person, the right leader, and the right party. So, keep it up. A segue to my question about multiculturalism. I know you are Mr. Multiculturalism. So can you please say more about what you do to enhance, protect, and promote multiculturalism in our
great question. So first of all, we restored a minister responsible for multiculturalism. This did not exist under the previous NDP government, but I gave one of our most respected and senior ministers, the Honorable Leela here, responsibility for culture, arts, and multiculturalism. So it's a specific ministerial responsibility. Secondly, one of the most important commitments in our platform was, as I've mentioned, the fairness for newcomers, making it easier for newcomers to get their credentials recognized and work at their skill level. And this, for me, is essential because successful social integration, which is, after all, the goal of multiculturalism, is dependent on successful economic integration. People are not going to feel fully at home in Canada unless and until they realize true economic opportunity. If people are upset, anxious, and even ashamed that they're stuck in survival jobs working below their skill level, they will not have the same pride in our country and feel the same ability to contribute culturally and socially. So for me, the success of multiculturalism depends in large part on economic inclusion, and that's why a growing economy and fairness for newcomers on credential recognition is so important. Thirdly, a large part of this is just symbolic. I think it's symbolic. And that's why every week I attend, as the Premier, multiple events in cultural communities. Yesterday morning, I spoke to over 10,000 Muslim Albertans gathered for the celebration of Eid al-Adha. The night before, I was at a South Asian event, Korean event, a Hindu event. So every day, almost, I as Premier am attending functions, as are members of our cabinet. I think that proximity, that ability to reach out is a big part of this. We'll also be creating a special security infrastructure program to provide grants to improve security at vulnerable multicultural community facilities. So mosques, synagogues, Hebrew schools, gurdwaras, perhaps mandars, and other communities that may face hate-inspired violence or vandalism. We will have a special program available to them to improve security fences, monitoring cameras, blast resistance film on the windows, and other forms of improved security, because protecting public safety is the first responsibility of government, and this is especially so for those who are vulnerable because of hate-inspired violence. So these are some of the things we'll be doing to give real practical expression to our belief in multiculturalism. One last point. Sorry, I really should draw this connection, but we believe, our government believes profoundly in school choice, because we believe parents know better than politicians what is the best form of education for their children. And that, we believe, is a real expression of multiculturalism. So the fact that parents can choose to send their children to a Khalsa school, or to a Islamic school, or a Hebrew school, or a Catholic school, or a Mandarin language school, these choices are the most important support that the government of Alberta gives to cultural diversity in the education system. And we will be bringing in a Choice in Education Act in the fall, which strengthens the support of the Alberta government for a diversity within our school system. Welcome, by the way. Hello.
Can I have another
Rishi,
question?
Go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 court decisions have gone in favor of federal carbon tax. So what different will Alberta be doing in the court?
So we believe that our case will, first of all, we are supporting the governments of Saskatchewan and Ontario in appealing those decisions to the Supreme Court of Canada. Secondly, we are launching our own Alberta government judicial reference of the threatened federal carbon tax. And we will be doing so with arguments being made, I believe, to the Alberta Court of Appeal in October. We believe that, frankly, our case will be stronger than that of Saskatchewan or Ontario because of our alternative to the federal carbon tax. We are calling it the TIER Fund, the Technology Innovation Emission Reduction Fund, which is a levy, a charge on major industrial emissions of greenhouse gases, including CO2. And this is a much broader policy than the ones offered by Saskatchewan or Ontario. So we believe that we'll have a much stronger case to make to the court that Alberta is occupying the regulatory space on environmental control of emissions. And so we are now working on the details of our TIER fund, our Technology and Innovation Emissions Reduction Fund, and we'll be presenting that as part of our evidence to the Alberta court. Second point, Rishi, is that we can look at the decisions of the Saskatchewan and Ontario courts, neither of which were unanimous. Saskatchewan actually, the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal rejected almost all of the federal government's arguments, but they ultimately found against Saskatchewan on fairly technical grounds on a decision of 3-2. So this is not a blowout victory by any means by the federal government. So we're able to analyze those decisions and make our arguments accordingly. We think we can make the most persuasive arguments. Finally, you may recall at Stampede, I welcomed the premiers of Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Northwest Territories, and Ontario to join us here. And we decided to give our attorneys general, our ministers of justice, marching orders to coordinate their legal strategy on fighting the carbon tax. And they gathered last week in Saskatoon. Our Minister of Justice, Doug Schweitzer, joined his counterparts from 4 other jurisdictions. So we are planning a much more coordinated approach. I cannot guarantee that we will win this fight at the Supreme Court of Canada. I hope that there will be a change of federal government and that we will not have a federal government threatening us with a carbon tax. But so plan A is to win at court, plan B is to win at the ballot box.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Last month, the government of Alberta, your party government, announced proclamation of Education Act with the amendment of new modernized school system.
Yes.
The Honorable Minister Springer can tell us what is the modernized changes.
Well, the Education Act, okay, so first of all, the School Act, which it replaces, has been in place in one form or another since 1905. So it is quite antiquated, which is why the previous progressive conservative governments spent several years developing a streamlined, modernized act called the Education Act. It was ready to be passed, to be proclaimed into law in 2015, but the NDP chose not to. And I believe the reason they chose not to is because the new Education Act places more emphasis on parental authority over children's education and on school choice. Those are values that we agree with, but the NDP does not share. So this is why we brought in the Education Act. It is a streamlined, modern bill. It wasn't written in 1905, it was written in 2012. And it also, in our view, provides stronger support for parental authority and school choice. And it will be complemented by another bill we're bringing forward in the fall called the Choice in Education Act, which will strengthen support for school choice.
The new proposed the assembly passed from the September 1st, the new school year.
It will be effective September 1.
Any other questions?
So talking about Alberta economy, the tension between Canada and China, China stopped importing Alberta beef or canola. Just how bad the consequence is on Alberta's economy, and if the situation continues or deteriorates, do you have any plans?
Well, I'm very concerned for two reasons. Firstly, the trade dispute between China and the United States risks putting the entire global economy into a recession that would affect us badly as well, because it would reduce global demand for and consumption of oil in particular. So that is a large concern that we have. Secondly, we are more specifically concerned about the recent Chinese barriers to importing Alberta agricultural products such as canola, pork, and beef, and that is hurting our farmers. We cannot control the big strategic concern that's between the United States and China. But the way we can deal with the second issue is to promote new and different export markets for Canadian and Alberta agricultural products. To be blunt, Alberta does not have a foreign policy. Our foreign policy is Canada's foreign policy. I have said to Prime Minister Trudeau that I fully respect and support any decisions that he makes in the relationship with China. I will not allow a foreign government to divide us in this country, province, between the federal and provincial governments on these foreign matters. However, we will put much more emphasis on developing export markets in India, Pakistan, Philippines, and elsewhere. I think that this is a cautionary tale. I think it's clear now that we became too dependent on the Chinese export market. Much like in the past, we became too dependent on the United States. There is an entire world out there. And this is why I asked our Minister of Trade, Tanya Furr, to travel to Korea and Japan last month to promote Canadian agricultural exports. And she and I will be very busy, together with other members of the cabinet and our public service, promoting Alberta exports in other countries. So that's the only way I can really deal with the Chinese trade barriers. But let me go one step further, and I think you'll like this. Canada is not to blame for the tensions in the Canada-China relationship. Canada is a liberal democracy that respects the rule of law. And the contentious extradition case in Vancouver is simply about this rights-respecting democracy enforcing our laws fairly. This is not analogous to a country without the rule of law arbitrarily arresting Canadians for political reasons. So Canada has nothing to apologize for in respecting the rule of law. And I think this is a cautionary tale about becoming overly dependent on one such export market.
I think we're at just after 6:30 now. Has everybody had a chance to ask their
I don't think
questions?
you have.
No, you haven't had a chance.
Which, are you with Philip?
Mabuhay Gallery.
Mabuhay Gallery.
Well, this is more on the small business sector. As you mentioned earlier, one of your main proponents is that if a community is thriving, there must be one Filipino store somewhere. But we also find that our biggest challenge for especially for small businesses is working capital, and that's already been established by a lot of finance.